The collision, the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel, sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the quiet murmur of Seattle's elite. Damian Cross stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows. His sharp charcoal suit, as impeccable as his reputation, was ruthless. At 32, he commanded a tech empire worth billions, but tonight's charity gala felt like another performance smile. Write a check. Leave before anyone got too comfortable. His assistant, Marcus, approached with the usual deference. Mr. Cross, the Foundation Board would like a photo opportunity, 5 minutes. Damian cut him off, his steel-gray eyes never leaving the city lights below. He'd built Cross Technologies from nothing. Clawing his way out of a childhood that taught him trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Every handshake here was calculated. Every conversation, a potential acquisition or threat. 3 floors below, Zara Bennett was having her own battle with the evening. She'd never intended to attend this glittering fundraiser, but when the Harmony Center's director fell ill, someone had to accept the donation on behalf of the music therapy program. Her vintage black dress, borrowed from her roommate, felt foreign compared to her usual jeans and cardigans. Just get the check and go, she whispered to herself, clutching a small purse that contained exactly $12 and her optimism that music could heal anyone, even the most broken souls. The elevator doors opened to reveal a wonderland of wealth she'd only seen in movies. Waiters glided past with champagne flutes, and conversations hummed with stock prices and political influence. Zara took a steadying breath and stepped forward, immediately colliding with a server carrying a tray of coffee for the late arriving guests. The impact sent her stumbling backward, arms windmilling for balance. As hot coffee arced through the air in what felt like slow motion, she watched in horror as the dark liquid splashed across the pristine white shirt of a man who'd been walking past, man whose presence seemed to command the entire room's attention. Damian Cross looked down at his ruined shirt, then up at a woman who'd just committed what most people would consider social suicide. The ballroom fell silent. Conversations halting mid-sentence as Seattle's most feared businessman assessed the damage. Zara's cheeks burned crimson. But instead of cowering, she grabbed napkins from a nearby table and stepped toward him. "Oh no, I'm so sorry. Here, let me help. It's just coffee. It'll come out, I promise." She began dabbing at his shirt with the urgency of someone who'd spent years cleaning up after preschoolers. Completely oblivious to the collective intake of breath around them. "You're not going to die from a little caffeine," she continued, her nervous energy translating into rapid-fire words. "Though you might want to avoid looking at me like I just burned down your house." Damian stood frozen, not from anger, but from complete bewilderment. In 15 years of business, no one had ever treated him so, casually. This stranger was touching his shirt, chattering about laundry techniques, and showing absolutely no awareness that she'd just doused the man who could buy and sell everyone. In this room, "Stop," he said quietly, but Zara was still dabbing and talking. "Really, I know it looks terrible, but my roommate spills everything on her clothes and I've become an expert at." "Stop." This time, his voice carried the authority that made board members tremble. And Zara finally looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. The napkins fell from her hands as she realized. She was staring into the most intense gray eyes she'd ever seen. There was something almost vulnerable in them, despite his intimidating presence, like storm clouds trying to hide sunlight. "I'm sorry," she whispered, suddenly aware of the dozens of people watching them. "I should probably go find whoever's in charge of disasters." But Damian didn't move aside to let her pass. Instead, he found himself asking, "What's your name?" "Zara," she replied, confused by his tone, not angry, not dismissive, but genuinely curious. "Zara Bennett. And you're probably someone very important who's going to have me banned from fancy hotels forever." For the first time in years, Damian Cross almost smiled. Almost. "Something like that?" he murmured, studying her face as if trying to solve a puzzle. Around them, the party slowly resumed its rhythm, but neither of them moved. In that moment, neither realized they just set in motion something that would change both their lives forever. The pursuit 3 weeks later, Zara walked into the Harmony Center to find chaos. Children's artwork covered every surface. Instruments lay scattered across the floor. Her colleague Jessica was frantically sorting through a mountain of paperwork. "Zara, thank God you're here," Jessica called out, waving a thick envelope. "We just received the most incredible donation. Someone gave us $50,000 anonymously." Zara dropped her guitar case, stunned. The center had been struggling to keep its doors open, relying on grants that barely covered rent. 50,000? Are you sure it's not a mistake? No mistake. The lawyer who delivered it said the donor specifically requested it go toward the music therapy program. Jessica's eyes sparkled with relief. "Can finally get those new instruments you've been wanting, maybe even hire another therapist." Zara processed this miracle. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was familiar about the timing. 3 weeks ago, she'd humiliated herself at that charity gala. Now suddenly they had more money than they'd seen in years. Meanwhile, across the city in his glass tower, Damien Cross was doing something he'd never done before: procrastinating. He'd been staring at quarterly reports for 20 minutes. But his mind kept drifting to storm gray eyes and the memory of someone treating him like a regular person instead of a weapon or a wallet. Marcus knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a privilege earned through 5 years of flawless service. "The Bennett investigation is complete, sir." Damien's jaw tightened. "Told you to gather information, not investigate her like a criminal." "Of course, sir." Zara Bennett, 26, graduated from Berkeley with a degree in music therapy. Works at the Harmony Center in Capitol Hill, specializes in trauma therapy for children. Lives in a shared apartment, drives a 15-year-old Honda, has never been married. No criminal record, volunteers at 3 different shelters. Marcus paused. "She's also been fighting the city to keep the center open. They're 3 months behind on rent." The last detail hit Damien like a physical blow. He'd grown up in the foster system, bouncing between homes where children were either ignored or seen as paychecks. The idea of kids losing a safe space because of money made something twist painfully in his chest. "Set up a meeting with the Harmony Center's board," he said quietly. "Sir, I want to tour the facility tomorrow." Marcus wisely didn't question the sudden interest in child therapy programs. "Shall I arrange for security?" "No." Damien's response surprised them both. "I'll go alone." The next afternoon, Zara was teaching 8-year-old Tommy to play a simple melody on the piano when she heard unfamiliar footsteps in the hallway. She glanced up to see a man in an expensive suit standing in the doorway, and her breath caught. It was him, the man from the gala, whose shirt she'd ruined, whose gray eyes had haunted her dreams for 3 weeks. "Miss Bennett." His voice was as controlled as she remembered, but there was something different in his expression. More uncertain, Tommy looked between them with the perceptive innocence of childhood. "Zara, do you know the fancy man?" We've met," she managed, her heart hammering. "Tommy, why don't you practice that song while I talk to our visitor?" She led the man whose name she still didn't know into the hallway, acutely aware of how different she looked in her faded jeans and paint-splattered sweater compared to the borrowed elegance of that night. "What are you doing here?" she asked, crossing her arms defensively. "I wanted to see the center," he replied, his eyes taking in the cheerful chaos around them, children's drawings taped to walls, instruments scattered on tables, the sound of laughter from other rooms. "Are you the anonymous donor?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. His silence was answer enough. "Why?" she pressed. "You don't even know me. You don't know anything about what we do here." Damien found himself studying her face, the way passion lit up her features when she talked about her work. "Tell me," he said simply. So she did. She led him through the center, introducing him to kids who'd experienced trauma, abuse, neglect, children whose stories echoed pieces of his own past he'd spent years trying to forget. He watched Zara work with a 6-year-old who hadn't spoken since witnessing domestic violence. Saw how music became a bridge to communication when words failed. "Music doesn't judge," Zara explained as they watched the little girl finally hum along to a lullaby. "It just accepts whatever someone needs to express." For kids who've been hurt, sometimes that's the first step toward healing. Damien stood transfixed, remembering a 10-year-old version of himself who used to hum under his breath in foster homes, the only comfort he could control. "You still haven't told me your name?" Zara said as they finished the tour, standing in the lobby surrounded by thank you drawings from former patients. He hesitated. knowing that once she knew who he was, everything would change. She'd either fear him or want something from him. They always did. "Damien," he said finally. "Damien Cross." Zara's eyes widened with recognition. She'd heard the name, seen it in business articles about ruthless takeovers and corporate warfare. This was the man known for destroying competitors without mercy, for building an empire on the bones of failed companies. But looking at him now, watching how gently he'd interacted with the children, she saw something else entirely. "Well, Damien Cross," she said, surprising them both with her calm tone. "Thank you for the donation. The kids don't care who you are in the business world. Here you're just someone who helped them have music in their lives." As he left that, Damien realized that for the first time in 20 years, someone had seen him as more than his reputation, and he found himself planning reasons to come back. The unveiling over the next month, Damien Cross did something unprecedented. He became a regular, not in boardrooms or power lunches, but at a small therapy center where children painted rainbows and learned to turn pain into melody, he told himself. It was due diligence, monitoring his investment, but even Marcus had stopped believing that excuse. You could buy 100 centers. His assistant had pointed out that morning. "Why do you keep visiting this one?" Damien had no answer that didn't sound like weakness. He arrived that Thursday to find Zara in the music room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with 9-year-old Riley, a foster child who'd been placed and returned 4 times. The boy was aggressively strumming a guitar, his small face twisted with anger. "I hate this stupid song," Riley shouted, throwing the guitar pick across the room. "I hate all of it." Zara didn't flinch. Instead, she picked up her own guitar and began playing something darker, more intense, not the gentle melodies Damien usually heard here, but something that sounded like fury and heartbreak had collided. "Sometimes we need angry music," she said, her fingers finding complicated chords that matched Riley's mood. "Sometimes pretty songs lie about how we really feel." Riley stopped his tantrum, listening as Zara's music gave voice to emotions he couldn't name. Slowly, hesitantly, he picked up his guitar again and began to follow her lead. Creating a raw duet of pain and defiance, Damien stood frozen in the doorway, something cracking open in his chest. He recognized that anger, that desperate need to lash out at a world that had failed to protect a child. He'd felt it every night in foster care. Every time another family decided he was too difficult, too damaged, too much trouble, when the song ended. Riley was crying not the helpless sobs of a victim, but the cleansing tears of someone who'd finally been heard better, Zara asked gently. Riley nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "Can we play the angry song again tomorrow?" "Can play whatever you need," she promised. As Riley left for his next session, Zara noticed Damien in the doorway. She'd grown accustomed to his visits. The way he'd appear without warning and observe the children with an intensity that spoke of old wounds. "You were in foster care," she said. It wasn't a question. Damien's entire body went rigid. He'd never told anyone about his childhood, spent millions crafting an origin story that spoke of middle-class determination rather than institutional abandonment. "I don't know what you mean," Zara stood, brushing dust off her jeans. "The way you watch the kids, especially the angry ones, the questions you ask about their placements, their histories, you recognize their pain because you lived it." He should have left then, should have reminded himself why vulnerability was a luxury he couldn't afford. Instead, he found himself following her to the small kitchen where she made coffee in mismatched mugs. "Tell me I'm wrong," she challenged. Softly handing him a cup with a chip on the handle, Damien stared into the coffee. Seeing his reflection fragmented in the dark surface, "My mother left me at St. Catherine's when I was 5, he said, the words feeling like broken glass in his throat. "She said she'd come back when she got clean. I waited for her until I was 18. Zara's sharp intake of breath made him look up, expecting pity. Instead, he saw understanding, not the hollow sympathy of someone who'd never known abandonment, but the recognition of someone who'd worked with hundreds of children carrying similar scars. "How many homes?" she asked. 17. The number had haunted him for decades. "I was difficult. I broke things when I got angry." Stole food and hid it in my room because I was always afraid they'd forget to feed me. I trusted no one and questioned everything. He laughed bitterly. Turned out those were excellent. Skills for business. They were survival skills, Zara corrected. You were a child protecting himself the only way he knew how. Something in her tone, not pitying, not horrified, just accepting, made Damien's carefully constructed walls tremble. He'd never had anyone acknowledge that his childhood wasn't just tragic, but that his responses had been logical, even necessary. The last family kept me until I aged out, he continued, unable to stop now that he'd started. The Hendersons. They were kind, but I was so convinced they'd send me back that I never let myself believe it was real. I left for college and never looked back. Do you ever wonder about her? Your mother? Damien's jaw tightened. She died of an overdose when I was 16. I was her next of kin, apparently. Had to identify the body. He set down his coffee cup. With trembling hands, I stood in that morgue and felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger, nothing. That's when I knew I was broken. Zara moved closer, her presence warm and steady. You're not broken, Damien, you're guarded. There's a difference. There, his gray eyes met hers, and she saw decades of pain he'd never allowed himself to process. I've built an empire on the principle that everyone will eventually leave or betray you. I fire people before they can disappoint me. I end relationships before they can end me. I live in a glass tower because walls are honest, they're meant to keep people out. But you came here, Zara pointed out. Keep coming back. Could have written a check and walked away. But instead, you sit with traumatized children and watch them heal. That doesn't sound like someone who's incapable of connection. Damien stared at her, this woman who saw past his reputation and his defenses to something he'd thought was dead. Why aren't you afraid of me? Everyone else is. Miles smiled, and it was like sunrise after the longest night, 'cause I see who you are when you think no one's looking. The way you crouch down to talk to the kids at their level, how you remember their names and ask about their progress, the fact that you donated anonymously because you didn't want credit, you just wanted to help. She reached out and touched his hand, the first gentle contact he'd experienced in years. That's not the behavior of a broken man, Damien. That's the behavior of someone who's been hurt but refuses to hurt others the same way. For the first time since he was 5 years old, Damien Cross felt like someone truly saw him, not the billionaire, not the corporate shark, but the scared little boy who'd learned to build walls so high that he'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. And for the first time in decades, those walls began to crack. The breaking point 2 months after that conversation in the kitchen, Damien's world exploded. He was in the middle of his morning meeting when Marcus burst in, his usual composure shattered. Sir, we have a problem. Victoria Ashford is calling. An emergency board meeting. Damien's blood turned to ice. Victoria Ashford, his former business partner. The woman who tried to steal his company 3 years ago and had been quietly plotting her revenge ever since. If she was making a move, it meant she'd found something devastating. What does she have? Marcus swallowed hard. Everything, sir. Your foster records, the sealed juvenile files, even hospital records from your mother's overdose. She's threatening to release it all unless you step down as CEO and sell her your controlling shares for a fraction of their worth. The room spun around Damien as 27 years of carefully constructed armor crumbled in an instant. His origin story, the narrative of middle-class determination that had helped him secure investors and board positions, was about to be revealed as a lie. Worse, the world would see him as he truly was, a damaged foster kid who'd clawed his way to the top through sheer desperation. How did she get sealed records? Money opens doors, sir. She's been working on this for months, waiting for the right moment to strike. Damien's hands clenched into fists, the old survival instincts roaring to life. In foster care, he'd learned that when you were cornered, you fought dirty, or you disappeared. There was no middle ground, no negotiation with predators. Cancel all my appointments, he said, his voice turning to steel, and get me everything we have on Victoria Ashford financial records, personal scandals, business dealings. Wants to play with fire? I'll burn her empire to the ground. Marcus hesitated. Sir, are you sure that's the best approach? Perhaps we could do it. The command came out like a whip crack, and Marcus fled. That evening, Damien didn't go to the Harmony Center, or the next day, or the day after that. Instead, he buried himself in his penthouse office, surrounded by lawyers and private investigators, building a case that would destroy Victoria, Ashford, so completely that no one would dare challenge him again. Meanwhile, Zara noticed his absence with growing concern. She'd grown accustomed to seeing him 3 times a week, watching him slowly soften around the children, sharing quiet conversations over coffee. His sudden disappearance felt like winter settling over her heart. On the 4th day, she decided to go to him. Cross Technology's gleaming tower felt like a monument to intimidation, all steel and glass rising into the Seattle sky like a middle finger to the world. The security guard looked at her casual clothes with undisguised skepticism. I'm here to see Damien Cross, she said, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Do you have an appointment? No, but then you need to leave. Zara was about to argue when Marcus appeared, looking harried and exhausted. Ms. Bennett? What are you doing here? I need to see Damien. He hasn't been to the center, and I'm worried about him. Marcus glanced around nervously. I'm afraid Mr. Cross is... indisposed. Perhaps you could call Marcus. Damien's voice cut through the lobby like a blade. He stood by the elevators looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his gray eyes burning with a familiar fury that made Zara's heart sink. He looked exactly like Riley had that first day, ready to destroy everything rather than let it destroy him first. You doing here? He asked, his tone cold enough to freeze blood. I was worried about you, Zara said simply, ignoring the curious stares of other employees. You disappeared, I'm busy. Turned to walk away, but Zara followed him into the elevator. Damien, what's wrong? You look like what? Spun to face her, and she saw the terrified child beneath the corporate predator, damaged, broken. Like exactly what I am? The elevator doors opened on his private floor, and Zara followed him into an office that looked like a war room. Papers covered every surface. Photos and documents spread across tables, and multiple phones rang incessantly. My past is about to become public, he said without preamble, his back to her as he stared out at the city. Every ugly detail of what I was before I built this empire. The world is going to see me as I really am, a foster kid who never learned how to trust anyone, who built everything on lies about where I came from. Zara's heart broke for him. So, let them see. He whirled around, his eyes blazing. You don't understand? This will destroy everything I've worked for. My investors will lose faith. My board will revolt. My competitors will smell weakness and tear me apart. Zara said gently. People will see your strength. They'll understand that everything you've built from nothing. That your success is even more impressive because of where you started, not despite it. You're naive, he said harshly. The business world doesn't reward vulnerability. It devours it. Then maybe you're in the wrong world. The words hung between them like a challenge. Damien's face hardened into the mask she'd seen that first night at the gala cold. Unreachable, dangerous. Get out, he said quietly. Damien, get out. It's time, he shouted, his voice echoing off the glass walls. Go back to your little therapy center and your broken children and leave me alone. I don't need your pity or your naive optimism. Don't need anything from you. Zara felt like he'd slapped her. She saw what he was doing, pushing her away before she could abandon him, destroying their connection before it could be used against him. It was the same pattern he'd used his entire life, the same survival mechanism that had kept him alive, but alone. I love you, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I love the man who sits on the floor with traumatized children. I love the person who remembers every kid's name and asks about their progress. I love the boy who survived 17 foster homes and still chose to help other abandoned children. Instead of becoming bitter, Damien's face crumpled for just a moment before the mask slammed back into place. Love isn't enough. It's everything, Zara whispered. But you have to choose it. You have to choose trust over fear, connection over isolation. I can't make that choice for you. She turned and walked toward the elevator, praying he'd call her back, that he'd choose love over the familiar comfort of solitude. But the only sound was the ringing of phones and the whisper of her footsteps on marble floors. As the elevator doors closed, Damien Cross stood alone in his glass tower, surrounded by the weapons he'd gathered to destroy his enemies, more isolated than he'd ever been in his life. And for the first time since he was 5 years old, he wondered if winning was worth losing the only person who'd ever seen him as more than his scars. The healing for 3 days, Damien prepared for war. His team had assembled enough ammunition to destroy Victoria Ashford's reputation, her business, and her personal life. Financial irregularities, tax evasion, evidence of corporate espionage, everything needed to obliterate her credibility before she could release his secrets. But on the 4th morning, as he stood in his office reviewing the final attack strategy, something made him look toward the Harmony Center's direction. Through his floor-twizzling windows, he could just make out the small building tucked between towering condos, where children were probably making music with Zara, healing their wounds one note at a time. He thought about what she'd said. Maybe, you're in the wrong world. What if she was right? What if the business world that had made him billions had also made him miserable? What if the empire he'd built to protect himself had become another kind of prison? His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Victoria Ashford's press conference is in 2 hours. Everything is ready for our counterattack. Damien stared at the message, then slowly set the phone down. He walked to his desk and pulled out a piece of paper, drawing that 8-year-old Tommy had given him weeks ago. It was a crayon portrait labeled Mr. Damien, showing a stick figure with a huge smile, surrounded by music notes and hearts. That's who he wanted to be. It's not the corporate shark who destroyed enemies without mercy, but the man who sat on floors with children and remembered their names. The man Zara had fallen in love with, without calling Marcus or his lawyers. Damien left his office and drove across the city to a small coffee shop where Victoria Ashford was undoubtedly preparing for her victory.
Oh.
She looked up in surprise as he slid into the booth across from her, her perfectly manicured fingers pausing over her laptop. Damien, come to beg. No, he said calmly. I came to make you an offer. Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. You're not in a position to negotiate. Actually, I am. Damien pulled out his phone and showed her a folder of documents. 3 counts of tax evasion, embezzlement from your charity foundation, and evidence that you've been selling corporate secrets to foreign competitors. I could destroy you in an hour. Her face went pale, but she recovered quickly. Mutually assured destruction, then. We both lose. Exactly. Damien leaned back, surprising her with his relaxed posture. Or we could both choose to be better than our worst impulses. What are you proposing? You withdraw your threat, delete whatever files you have on me, and I'll do the same with yours. We go back to competing like civilized business people instead of trying to destroy each other's lives. Victoria studied him suspiciously. Why would you give up the chance to annihilate me? The old Damien Cross would have crushed me without hesitation. Because I'm tired of being the old Damien Cross, he said simply. I'm tired of living in fear, tired of treating every relationship like a potential betrayal, tired of building walls so high that I can't see the sky. She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly closed her laptop. You've changed. Someone taught me that I could. An hour later, Damien stood outside the Harmony Center, his heart pounding harder than it had during any corporate negotiation. Through the window, he could see Zara leading a group of children in what looked like a drum circle.
Oh.
Her face radiant with joy as they created chaotic, beautiful music together. She looked up and saw him, and the drumming stopped. For a moment, they just stared at each other through the glass, the woman who'd taught him to trust, and the man who'd run from love when it mattered most. Zara said something to the children and walked outside, her expression guarded. What are you doing here, Damien? I made a choice, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I chose you. I chose us. I chose love over fear, even though it terrifies me more than any hostile takeover ever could. What about Victoria, your reputation? Your empire? Victoria and I came to an understanding. As for my reputation, he pulled out his phone and showed her a news alert. I called a press conference. I told them everything about the foster homes, about my mother, about building my company from nothing because I was afraid of having nothing again. He managed a shaky smile. The stock actually went up. Apparently investors like a success story, even one that starts in tragedy. Zara's eyes filled with tears. Damien, ... I know I hurt you, he continued, stepping closer. I know I pushed you away when you offered me everything I'd ever wanted but was too scared to take. I know I might not deserve another chance, but I'm asking anyway because you taught me that love is worth the risk. It's not about deserving, Zara whispered, reaching up to touch his face. It's about choosing. Every day, in small moments and big ones, choosing to trust instead of fear, to stay instead of run, to believe in love even when it's scary. Then I choose you, Damien said, covering her hand with his, every day in every way I know how. I want to learn how to be loved, Zara. I want to learn how to love without walls, without exit strategies, without the fear that it's all going to disappear. Through the window, the children had pressed their faces against the glass, watching the drama unfold. Tommy waved enthusiastically, and Damien found himself laughing, a sound of pure joy that he couldn't remember making since childhood. The kids missed you, Zara said, smiling through her tears. I missed them too. I missed you. I miss the man I am when I'm here, the man you see when you look at me. Zara kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. So what happens now? She whispered. Damien looked at the small building behind her, filled with music and laughter and healing. He thought about his glass tower across the city, empty and cold, and designed to keep the world at bay. Now I learn how to build something new, he said. Not walls, but bridges. Not an empire, but a life. With you if you'll have me. Always, Zara promised. And for the first time in 27 years, Damien Cross truly believed in forever. 6 months later, the new children's wing of the Harmony Center opened with Damien's name quietly engraved on a small plaque by the entrance. But inside, surrounded by children's laughter and Zara's music, he'd found something worth more than any Fortuna home where the boy he'd been and the man he'd become could finally, completely be at peace.